The exact moment I realized my family had never invited me to Thanksgiving for love was when my father slid a notarized contract across the dinner table and told me I had two choices: pay $78,000 for my younger sister's wedding or leave the family forever. He said it calmly, like he was asking me to pass the cranberry sauce. My mother stood at the end of the table in her pearl necklace and perfect lipstick, arms crossed like she was presiding over a board meeting instead of Thanksgiving dinner. My sister Madison sat 2 seats away in a white satin dress, yes, on Thanksgiving, with a tiny rhinestone tiara in her hair, smiling like she was waiting for applause. Around us, 50 people. Aunts, uncles, cousins, in-laws, church friends, family friends. The kind of people who love family values as long as they're watching someone else get sacrificed for them. My parents' lake house in Wisconsin was glowing with expensive candles, polished silverware, and fake warmth. It looked like a Hallmark movie. It felt like an execution. I'm Avery Collins. I'm 31 years old, divorced, and I work as a compliance analyst in Chicago, which ironically means my entire job is basically identifying fraud before it destroys people's lives. I just never expected the biggest fraud case of my life to be sitting across from me wearing a tiara and calling herself my sister. My father tapped the paper once. Madison's wedding expenses are finalized. Venue, catering, floral design, guest accommodations. You'll be covering $78,000. For a second, I honestly thought I misheard him. I laughed. Actually laughed. Sorry, what? No one else laughed. Not one person. My mother's voice came sharp and clean. Don't be disrespectful. Madison sighed dramatically and took a sip of wine. It's already basically handled. I already booked the venue using your credit information. This is really just you making it official. That sentence hit harder than the number, because suddenly this wasn't just entitlement, it was theft. I stared at her. You did what? She rolled her eyes like I was being dramatic. Oh my God, Avery, don't start. It's my wedding, not a criminal investigation. I looked at my father. He didn't even blink. He just pushed the pen closer. Sign. That was the moment I understood this dinner had never been about family. It was a trap. A perfectly staged public ambush designed to leave me with only one socially acceptable answer: yes. Because saying no in private makes you difficult, but saying no in front of 50 people makes you the villain. My mother knew that. She had built her entire life on that principle. She smiled tightly. Your sister gets one wedding. One. You make more money than anyone else in this family. It's time you gave something back. Gave something back. I almost admired how cleanly she said it, as if my entire adult life had already been a series of giving back. Helping with Madison's rent, covering Dad's temporary business losses, paying Mom's medical bills she somehow forgot to mention were cosmetic dentistry, holiday gifts, emergency loans, family favors. Nothing was ever a request. It was an obligation disguised as love, and if I hesitated, I was selfish, ungrateful, cold. My Aunt Patricia gave me that fake sympathetic smile she always used before saying something awful. Well, honey, family helps family. Funny how family only seemed to flow in one direction, toward Madison, always toward Madison. Madison, the golden child. Madison, who failed upward through life like it was an Olympic sport. Madison, who once maxed out 3 credit cards on a healing trip to Tulum and somehow ended up being the victim. Madison, who never paid for consequences because my parents paid them for her, usually with my money. I looked around the table. Nobody looked uncomfortable. Nobody looked surprised, because they all knew this had been planned. Maybe not every detail, but enough. Enough to sit there with full plates and watch me be cornered like entertainment between turkey and dessert. Then my mother did something I'll never forget. She stood up, walked over to me, picked up my dinner plate, full, untouched, and dumped it straight into the trash. The room went silent. She set the empty plate down in front of me and said, "Freeloaders don't eat here." That was the first time all night I felt something dangerous. Not sadness, not humiliation, clarity. Because humiliation is only powerful when you still believe the people doing it deserve your shame. And in that moment, I stopped believing. My father stood and walked to the kitchen counter. He picked up my car keys, my actual car keys, and slipped them into his pocket. The car stays here until you decide to do the right thing. There it was, the final performance. Public humiliation, financial coercion, physical control, all dressed up as family responsibility, and 50 people watched. Nobody moved. Nobody defended me. Even worse, some of them looked relieved because as long as I was the target, they weren't. Madison leaned back in her chair and smiled. Oh my God, stop being dramatic. But she sounded afraid because she knew. She knew exactly what I meant. And for the first time in my life, they weren't sure I was coming back. I spent the first night in a cheap hotel 20 minutes from my parents' lake house because my father still had my car keys and I refused to go back for them. The room smelled like old carpet and bad decisions. I sat on the edge of the bed at 1:13 a.m., still wearing my coat, staring at the beige wall while cold fries from room service went untouched beside me. People think walking away from a toxic family feels dramatic. It doesn't. Sometimes it feels like silence. Sometimes it feels like staring at a vending machine in a hallway and realizing nobody gets to invoice your existence anymore. My phone looked like a crime scene. 32 missed calls, texts from my mother, voicemails from my father, 3 dramatic paragraphs from Madison. Even cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly felt spiritually called to mediate. I ignored all of it because I knew my family. The first phase was outrage. The second was guilt. The third would be reputation management, and I was too tired to participate. I opened my laptop instead. That probably tells you everything you need to know about me. My name is Avery Collins, and I process emotional trauma by making folders. I work as a compliance analyst for a healthcare company in downtown Chicago. Basically, my job is catching people before small lies become expensive disasters, unauthorized charges, vendor fraud, expense manipulation, people trying to hide ugly things inside clean paperwork. I'm good at it because I grew up in it. When your mother can weaponize guilt before breakfast, fraud detection becomes instinct. I wasn't always like this. There was a time I genuinely believed if I worked hard enough, succeeded enough, stayed calm enough, I could eventually earn peace inside my family. That's the lie kids like me grow up with, that love is a performance review. If you're good enough, useful enough, quiet enough, maybe they'll finally choose you. They won't. They'll just raise the price. I learned that young. Madison is 3 years younger than me, but somehow she was always treated like the fragile miracle child, and I was the emergency backup generator. She cried, people rushed. I struggled, people asked why I was being dramatic. When I got into Northwestern on scholarship, my parents skipped orientation because Madison had an emotionally difficult weekend after losing a sorority election. When I got divorced at 28, my mother's first response was, well, maybe if you were softer, men wouldn't feel so judged around you. Madison's engagement party happened 2 weeks later. Guess which event mattered more? My ex-husband, Daniel, used to say my family treated me like a human credit score. At the time, I defended them. That should have been my first clue the marriage was already over. Daniel wasn't perfect, but he was the first person who ever looked at my family and said, this isn't normal. I hated him for saying it, mostly because I knew he was right. We divorced quietly. No cheating, no screaming. Just the slow death that happens when one person keeps trying to build a life while the other is still busy surviving their childhood. He wanted a partner. I was still busy being a financial shock absorber for people who called it love. The divorce embarrassed my mother more than it hurt her. She introduced me at church for 6 months as Avery, who is focusing on her career right now. Translation, failed marriage, but let's keep it elegant. Madison, meanwhile, got engaged to Nolan Mercer. Perfect teeth, good family, old money without being tacky about it. The kind of man my mother described as solid. The kind of engagement my mother treated like a family IPO. Everything became about optics, venue selection, guest lists, floral architecture, which I learned is apparently a real phrase rich people say without irony. And from the beginning, there was this quiet assumption hanging in the air. I would help pay. Not because anyone asked directly, because they never had to. It started small. Avery, can you just cover the photographer deposit for now? Avery, your sister's under stress. Can you handle the bridal shower venue? Avery, don't make money weird. Money weird, that phrase, as if boundaries were some embarrassing personality flaw. About 2 years ago, something happened that changed the way I saw all of them. Someone tried to add themselves as an authorized user on one of my personal credit cards. The bank froze the account immediately and flagged it for internal review. They never explicitly said who it was. They didn't have to. The timing lined up too perfectly. Madison had just been denied for another luxury apartment lease. My parents suddenly got very interested in my backup cards. And when I brought it up, silence. Then offense. Then the classic Collins script. How dare you accuse family? So I did what I always did back then. I swallowed it. I changed passwords, locked accounts, moved on. Or at least I pretended to. But I kept the emails, every one, because deep down I knew one day I'd need proof. Thanksgiving just happens to be the day they forced me to use it. At 7:42 the next morning, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't family. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. Instead, I answered. Hello? A man's voice. Tired. Controlled. Hi, is this Avery Collins? Yes? A pause. Then, my name's Ethan Mercer. I'm Nolan's cousin. I sat up straighter. Something in his tone made my stomach drop. He continued. I think your parents have been using your name with my aunt and uncle, and before they lose more money, I thought you deserved to know. I stared at the hotel wall, and just like that, I understood something worse than betrayal. This wasn't just about my family taking from me. They had expanded the scam, and now other people were standing inside it. People with lawyers, people with receipts, people who didn't care about preserving Thanksgiving. I asked one question. How much money? Ethan exhaled. Enough that if what I'm hearing is true, your sister may not have a wedding anymore. And for the first time since I walked out of that house, I smiled. Not because I wanted destruction, because I finally had leverage. And people like my parents only understand two languages: money and consequences. I met Ethan Mercer the next afternoon in a coffee shop in Fort Mill, just far enough from my parents' social circle that nobody would accidentally run into us and turn it into church gossip. He was already there when I arrived. Mid-30s, expensive watch, tired eyes. The kind of man who looked like he'd spent the last week explaining someone else's bad decisions to people with attorneys. He stood when I walked in. Avery? I nodded. Ethan. No dramatic handshake, no fake warmth, just mutual exhaustion. That made me trust him more. We sat, and before I could even ask, he pulled out his phone. I'm just going to show you. That's when I knew it was bad. Not family misunderstanding bad, documentation bad. He opened a message thread between his aunt, Nolan's mother, and my mother, and there it was. My name. Again and again, like I had been living a second life I never consented to. Denise Collins. Avery is handling the major financial commitments privately. She prefers discretion. Denise Collins. She already allocated funds from a family trust for Madison's venue and design package. Denise Collins. Avery hates discussing money publicly, but everything important is covered. I stared at the screen. I actually laughed once, a short, sharp sound, because what else do you do when your own mother invents fictional wealth in your name like she's pitching a Netflix scam documentary? There is no family trust, I said. Ethan nodded. I figured. I leaned back. My grandparents left me my grandmother's piano and 3 ugly Christmas ornaments. That's the trust. He smiled for the first time. Honestly, that sounds more believable. Then his face went serious again. My aunt and uncle advanced $22,000. I blinked. For what? For catering, accommodations, some guest transportation. They were told your contribution would cover venue, floral design, photography, basically the expensive parts. $22,000. Not symbolic money, real money, legal money, marriage-ending money. I asked quietly, does Nolan know? Ethan rubbed a hand over his face. He knows enough to know something's wrong. He doesn't know how deep it goes yet. That almost made me feel bad. Almost. Because Nolan had never exactly been rude to me. He was just one of those men who benefited from silence because he assumed everyone smiling must mean everything was fine. He wasn't malicious, just comfortably uninvolved, which honestly is how people like my parents survive. They build entire empires on other people's polite avoidance. Ethan kept scrolling. There's more. Of course there was. Apparently, my mother had also told Nolan's family that I was intentionally staying financially private because of my divorce made me sensitive about money. That one almost impressed me. She had weaponized my divorce for wedding fraud. Efficient. She said I was emotionally overwhelmed, I said. She said you were generous but difficult, he replied. Ah, her favorite version of me. He looked at me carefully. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why didn't you stop this earlier? That question should have offended me. Instead, it just made me tired, because people outside toxic families always ask that. Why didn't you leave? Why didn't you say no? Why didn't you expose it? As if dysfunction arrives like a home invasion instead of a slow renovation. I stirred my coffee I hadn't touched. Because when you grow up inside it, crazy doesn't feel crazy. It feels like Tuesday. He nodded slowly. Fair enough. Then I said the thing I had been trying not to say out loud. They tried something like this before, with my credit. His eyes narrowed. Before Madison got engaged? Yes. And you think this is connected? I met his eyes. I think my family has been treating my financial identity like a shared subscription service for years. That landed. He sat back. Jesus. Yeah. For a second, we just sat there in silence, two people connected by the same family disaster. Then he said, "My aunt wants to meet you." I already knew what that meant. This was moving from suspicion to confirmation, from family drama to liability. I asked, "Nolan too?" Ethan nodded. He should hear it from someone who isn't your mother. Fair. Very fair. I stared out the coffee shop window for a second, at normal people walking dogs and carrying groceries and living lives untouched by weaponized Thanksgiving. I envied them. Then I pulled my laptop from my bag. Ethan looked surprised. Right now? I opened a folder labeled Collins. Yes, right now. Inside were years of screenshots, flagged account notices, voicemails, texts, bank alerts, receipts of small manipulations that looked harmless alone and criminal together. I had never shown anyone the full timeline, because showing it would make it real. And once it became real, there would be no going back to pretending. But pretending had gotten expensive. I turned the screen toward him. If your family wants the truth, I'll give them the truth. Nothing dramatic, nothing emotional. Just facts. He looked at the folder, then at me, and said quietly, "I think this is going to end your sister's wedding." I closed the laptop. "No," I said. My family ended her wedding the moment they decided my life was collateral. That night, Madison called me 16 times. I declined every one. Then came the text. "Madison, are you talking to Nolan's family?" Madison, "Mom says you're trying to humiliate me." Madison, "If you ruin this, I swear to God." I stared at the screen, then replied with the first honest text I'd ever sent her. Me, "You ruined this when you used my name like it belonged to you." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then finally, "I thought you'd come through. You always do." And there it was, the family motto. Avery absorbs it. Avery fixes it. Avery pays. I looked at that message for a long time, then locked my phone. Not anymore. Tomorrow I was meeting Nolan's family, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't walking into a room to defend myself. I was walking in with evidence. The next morning, I met Nolan's family at a private dining room inside a country club restaurant my mother would have absolutely loved and absolutely pretended she didn't care about. Quiet lighting, expensive chairs, the kind of place where people say devastating things in calm voices. Perfect. Nolan was already there. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. His mother, Claire Mercer, sat perfectly still with her hands folded so tightly I could see the tension in her fingers. His father, Richard Mercer, didn't bother with pleasantries. He looked at me once and said, "Start at the beginning." So I did. No dramatic speech, no emotional breakdown, just facts. I told them that I had never agreed to pay for Madison's wedding. There was no trust, there was no financial commitment. I had never authorized any vendor to use my name, my credit, or my accounts. Then I showed them the frozen card alert from 2 years ago, the unauthorized authorized user attempt, the Thanksgiving contract, the text messages, the voicemails, the timeline. Every neat little disaster arranged in chronological order. There's something strange about watching rich people realize they've been lied to. They don't explode, they get quieter, and somehow that's worse. Claire read every page like she was looking for a version of reality she could still respect. She didn't find one. Richard leaned back in his chair and asked one question. Did Madison know there was no trust? I didn't hesitate. Yes. Nolan finally looked up. His voice was low. "You're sure?" I met his eyes. She may not have known every detail, but she knew enough to know the money wasn't hers to promise. That hurt him. You could see it happen. Not dramatically, just the kind of quiet heartbreak that rearranges someone's future in real time. Then Richard stood up, stepped outside, and made 3 calls. When he came back, the room had changed. "The catering payment scheduled for next week is suspended." He sat down. "The academic accommodations are suspended." Another pause. "The venue review is now under legal review." Then he looked directly at Nolan. "And until that review is complete, there is no wedding." Claire added softly, "And there will be no more private conversations with Denise Collins." That was it. No screaming, no dramatic plate throwing, just precision. That kind of damage lasts longer. My phone started ringing before I even left the parking lot. Madison, decline. Mom, decline. Dad, decline. Then the texts came. Mom, how dare you go to them? Dad, call me now before this gets worse. Madison, you ruined everything. That one almost made me laugh. Almost. Because people like Madison always think consequences arrive from nowhere, like karma is some rude surprise instead of overdue accounting. I drove home in silence. At a red light, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a family group chat I had muted 3 years ago for mental health reasons. Apparently, Nolan's mother had sent a message to both families. Due to serious financial misrepresentations concerning wedding funding, all current wedding obligations are suspended pending legal and financial clarification. Please do not make further payments or arrangements. Elegant, professional, absolutely lethal. My phone started ringing before I even left the parking lot. My mother. I finally answered on 18. She didn't even say hello. What did you tell them? I pulled into my apartment parking lot. The truth. You have embarrassed this family beyond repair. No, I said, you did that at Thanksgiving. Her voice dropped into that dangerous calm mothers use before emotional warfare. You are punishing your sister because you've always been jealous of her. There it was. Jealousy, the oldest weapon. As if my problem with Madison was envy and not the fact that she kept trying to spend my future like it was store credit. I sat there gripping the steering wheel. Do you know what's amazing, Mom? Silence. You still think this is about feelings. It's about fraud. She snapped. Don't you dare use that word. Why? Because it's accurate? She hung up. 10 minutes later, Madison was pounding on my apartment door like the building was on fire. I opened it but didn't let her inside. She was still wearing full makeup from whatever bridal meltdown she'd been performing all day. Mascara slightly smudged. Expensive coat. Pure panic. Do you understand what you've done? She hissed. I leaned against the doorframe. Clarify. My venue is frozen. My florist paused everything. Nolan won't answer me. His mother won't answer me. His father is talking about attorneys. She was shaking. Good. Not because I wanted her afraid, because fear was the first honest emotion I'd seen her in years. I said quietly, they paused because your lies caught up. She stepped closer. Our lies. Then she froze because she heard it too. That single word. Ours. Confession by grammar. I just looked at her. She started crying. Real crying this time. Not performance, not audience tears. Messy, ugly panic. And then she said something I will never forget. Avery, please don't let them think I did this alone. That should have made me feel powerful. It didn't. It made me feel tired because even now, her instinct wasn't accountability, it was redistribution. She still needed someone else to hold part of the weight. I looked at my little sister, the golden child, the protected one, the girl my parents taught would always be saved. And I said the truest thing I'd ever said to her. You didn't do it alone, but you did do it. She cried harder. They told me you'd fix it. I nodded. I know, they taught me that too. Then I stepped back inside and closed the door. Not dramatically, not cruelly, just finally. And on the other side of that door, for the first time in my life, I chose myself over the role they wrote for me. The next morning, my father called my office, and that's when I knew the real war had started. I found out my father had called my office because my manager, Sandra, called me before I even made it to my desk. Her voice was calm, but in corporate America, calm usually means someone is trying very hard not to say, "What the hell is happening? Avery, can you come to my office for a minute?" Perfect. Exactly how every great personal disaster begins. I walked into her office expecting the worst. HR was already there. Also perfect. Sandra closed the door gently. There was a call this morning from a man identifying himself as your father. I sat down. Of course there was. She continued. He claimed there was an urgent financial misconduct issue involving you and said the company needed to be warned before you caused serious legal exposure. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because once you reach a certain level of absurdity, your nervous system just gives up and starts doing stand-up comedy. HR slid a printed note across the desk. He also used the words unstable and dishonest. Nice. Classic Tom Collins. If emotional control fails, try professional sabotage. I took a breath. Then I opened my bag and handed them a folder, because apparently I had become the kind of woman who carried preloaded family crisis documentation to work. Honestly, progress. I'm really sorry, I said. I anticipated this. Sandra opened the folder. Inside, copies of the Thanksgiving contract, screenshots, vendor communication, proof of the fraudulent claims, and the email I had already sent warning them that retaliatory family contact might happen. She read for maybe 30 seconds before leaning back. Then she said the single most healing sentence I had heard in years. We've got you. I almost cried. Didn't, but almost. Because when you grow up in dysfunction, basic professional support feels like being adopted by emotionally stable strangers. HR nodded. This stays documented. If there's further contact, legal handles it. That was it. No suspicion, no interrogation, just boundaries. My family had spent 31 years teaching me boundaries were betrayal. Turns out, healthy people called out Tuesday. When I left Sandra's office, I sat in my car for 10 full minutes before going back inside. Not because I was overwhelmed, because I was realizing something dangerous. I was no longer alone. And once toxic people realize outside systems won't help them control you, they panic. By lunch, my phone looked like an emergency alert system. Voicemails from my father, texts from my mother, a 3-minute crying audio message from Madison I refused to listen to because I enjoy peace. Then came the one message that mattered. Unknown number. Nolan. I stared at it for a full 30 seconds before opening it. Nolan, I owe you an apology. Can we talk? Interesting. Very interesting. I agreed to meet him that evening. Neutral place, public, because I had learned enough to know never to enter emotional conversations without visible exits. We met at a quiet bar downtown. He looked worse than before. Tie loosened, sleepless eyes, the expression of a man reviewing every red flag he ever romanticized. He sat down and said the words immediately. I should have seen it. No defense. Good start. I took a sip of water. Seen what? That your family treated you like an account, not a person. Well, that was better than most therapy sessions I had paid for. He rubbed his face. My mother played me one of Madison's voicemails. I stayed quiet. He continued. She was angry because you were dragging your feet on the release, and she said if I handled my family, she'd handle hers. There it was. Not suspicion, confirmation. He looked at me. Was there ever a version of this where she planned to tell me the truth? I answered honestly. No. He nodded, like that hurt more than yelling would have. Then he surprised me. There's something else. Apparently, after Thanksgiving, Madison had tried to convince him I was having some kind of emotional breakdown, that I was unstable, paranoid, financially obsessive, that my divorce had made me irrational, creative, cruel, very on brand. I smiled without humor. She gets that from my mother. He looked embarrassed. I almost believed her. Most people do. That's how manipulation works. It sounds reasonable if you haven't watched the pattern. He sat there for a moment. Then, I ended it. I blinked. With Madison? He nodded. Just this morning. Simple, flat, done. No dramatic engagement ring throw, no cinematic storm, just one adult man deciding he did not want to marry into a professionally managed fraud ecosystem. Honestly, respect. I asked, how did she take it? He let out one exhausted laugh. She accused me of choosing spreadsheets over love. I smiled. She hates losing to documentation. Then he said the thing I didn't expect. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. That one hit, because he didn't owe me protection, but acknowledgement. That mattered. I looked at him. You weren't supposed to protect me, you were just supposed to notice. He nodded. Fair. Before we left, he said something that would become the final domino. My father is considering recovering losses formally, not just canceling things. Legal recovery. Translation, my parents are about to discover what happens when consequences come with attorneys instead of guilt trips. When I got home that night, there was a package outside my apartment door. No return address. Inside was my car key and one handwritten note from my father. 3 words. You made this worse. I stared at it for a long time. Then I laughed because for the first time in my life, worse for them didn't mean wrong for me. And the next morning, the family group chat exploded because someone had sent my Thanksgiving contract to everyone and nobody knew it was me. It wasn't. That was the best part because the truth, once it starts moving, doesn't need your help anymore. I wish I could tell you I leaked the Thanksgiving contract to the family group chat like some mastermind revenge queen with dramatic background music. I didn't. And honestly, that made it better, because when truth spreads on its own, people can't dismiss it as bitterness. They have to sit with it. And apparently, someone at that dinner, one of the 50 silent witnesses, had finally decided they didn't want to be part of the cover-up. The contract hit the group chat at 8:12 a.m. No message, no explanation, just a clear photo of my father's notarized demand for $78,000 and my signature line sitting there blank like a threat. Then, chaos. Aunt Patricia, what is this? Cousin Leah, wait, this was real? Uncle Ron, Tom, please tell me this is fake. Church friend Susan, I am deeply uncomfortable reading this. My mother responded exactly how I expected. Janice, this is a private family misunderstanding being weaponized by someone emotionally unstable. Translation, Avery. Always Avery. But this time, something different happened. People pushed back. My Aunt Paula, the same aunt who watched my dinner get thrown away and said nothing, wrote, I was there. It happened. Just 5 words. but 5 honest words can destroy 20 years of manipulation. Then, cousin Leah added, I heard Madison say she already used Avery's credit card. And suddenly, the silence that had protected my parents started turning against them. That's the thing about toxic families. Everyone knows. They just wait to see who speaks first. Once someone does, people start remembering very loudly. By noon, 3 separate relatives had privately messaged me stories I'd never heard. My uncle admitted my father once asked if I'd be willing to co-sign a temporary business loan they never planned to repay. A cousin confessed my mother had asked him to pressure me into helping with Madison's honeymoon fund. My grandmother's sister, who was 81 and terrifying, sent exactly one sentence. I told your mother years ago that raising one daughter as a princess requires sacrificing the other. Honestly, icon. Then came the real problem. Richard Mercer's attorney sent a formal notice, not to me, to my parents, requesting documentation for all financial representations made regarding the wedding, refunds, reimbursements, vendor contracts, deposits, proof. My father called me 23 times that day. 23. I answered none of them. At voicemail number 17, panic had replaced anger. At 21, he actually sounded old. By 23, he said, Avery, people are asking questions and your mother is not handling this well. That line almost deserved an award, as if my mother's emotional inconvenience was somehow the central tragedy here. Meanwhile, Madison had gone into full social media damage control mode. Cryptic Instagram stories, black screen with white text, some betrayals come from blood, very subtle. She posted a blurry quote about narcissists and loyalty. I almost sent her a grammar correction. Didn't. Growth. But the real revenge wasn't social, it was financial. Because once vendors realized funding was unstable, they stopped being sentimental and started becoming businesses. The venue kept part of the deposit, the florist had a non-refundable sourcing fee, the luxury tent company had already scheduled installation and wanted cancellation penalties, the live band had a brutal contract clause my father definitely never read because men like him believe confidence is a substitute for paperwork. By the end of the week, the total damage was well over $100,000, and for the first time in recorded family history, they had to pay for Madison themselves. No secret Avery bailout, no guilt-funded rescue, just consequences. My father sold his classic Corvette, the one he loved more openly than most relatives. Gone. My mother quietly canceled the kitchen renovation she had been bragging about for 6 months. Also gone. Funny how fast family sacrifice becomes less inspiring when they're the ones sacrificing. Then my mother showed up at my apartment. Alone. No pearls, no performance, just a wool coat, swollen eyes, and the exhausted posture of someone meeting consequences for the first time. I didn't invite her in. We stood in the hallway like strangers discussing weather. She looked at me and whispered, "Please stop this." I almost asked which part. The truth? The proof? The part where I stopped volunteering to be exploited? Instead, I said, "I didn't start this." Her face crumpled. "We were trying to help Madison." "No," I said. "You were trying to use me," she cried. Actual crying, not strategic tears, not audience tears, just a woman standing in a hallway realizing control had left the building. Then she said the thing I had waited my whole life to hear. We handled it wrong. I just stared at her, because even now, it wasn't we were wrong, it was handled wrong. Like cruelty was just a logistics issue. I shook my head. "That's why this happened, Mom. Because to you, abuse is just bad strategy." She reached for my arm. I stepped back. "You threw away my dinner. You took my car. You contacted my job. You lied to another family in my name. You don't need forgiveness right now. You need reality." She left without another word. 3 days later, Madison's wedding was officially canceled. Not postponed, canceled. Nolan ended the engagement through attorneys. His final email was one sentence. "Due to material misrepresentation and irreparable loss of trust, I do not see a path forward." Brutal, elegant, correct. And still, the story wasn't over, because there was one final thing my parents had not yet done. They had not apologized where they humiliated me publicly, and I had decided I was done accepting private regret for public abuse. If they wanted peace, it was going to cost them honesty, in front of everyone. exactly where they broke it.
The call came on a Sunday night. No warning, no text, just a Zoom link dropped into a family group chat like a grenade with polite formatting. Family meeting, mandatory attendance. I almost didn't join. Almost, but curiosity is a dangerous thing when you've finally stopped being afraid. So I clicked in, and there they were. 22 squares on a screen. The same ecosystem that watched me get cornered at Thanksgiving. Same silent audience. Except this time, nobody looked comfortable. My father was already seated, jaw tight, like he was about to negotiate a hostage situation instead of admit wrongdoing. My mother sat beside him, arms crossed, face pale but controlled. Madison wasn't in frame at first. Then she slowly appeared, makeup minimal, eyes red. No tiara this time, no costume, just consequences. My father cleared his throat. We are going to address recent misunderstandings. I almost laughed. Misunderstandings, that word again. He continued. There has been misinformation circulating regarding financial commitments and family obligations. My mother jumped in immediately. Avery has taken private family discussions and turned them into public humiliation. That was her version of reality. Everything I did equaled betrayal. Everything they did equaled private family matter. Then something unexpected happened. Uncle Ron unmuted himself. Tom, I read the contract. Silence. Then Aunt Patricia. I was there. You didn't just ask her. You cornered her. Another voice. She didn't agree to anything. The screen shifted energy instantly. For the first time in my life, my parents didn't control the narrative in the room they built. My father tried again. Avery has always been difficult about financial responsibility. That's when Nolan's father appeared on screen. Richard Mercer. Calm, polished, dangerous. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. We have reviewed every communication regarding the wedding funding. Every representation made to my family involving Avery Collins has been found to be false. My mother blinked. That's not... He cut her off. Your daughter did not misinterpret anything. She was lied about and her financial identity was used without consent. That word landed hard. Consent. My mother's control language had no defense for it. Madison suddenly spoke. I didn't know it would go this far. And there it was, the pivot. The golden child beginning to separate herself from the fire. Not accountability, self-preservation. My father turned to her sharply. Madison! But Richard continued. The wedding is canceled. Vendor agreements are being reviewed for misrepresentation. Legal counsel has advised multiple parties to consider recovery of damages. My father's face tightened. This is being handled internally. No, Richard said, it's not. That's when the silence broke completely. People started speaking over each other. Old relatives admitting things, screens lighting up with chat messages, receipts, screenshots, years of small truths finally stacking into something undeniable. My aunt quietly said, I watched her get her dinner thrown away. Another cousin, I heard Madison talk about using her credit card. Someone else, this wasn't confusion, this was a pattern. My mother's voice rose again. This is an attack on our family. And I finally spoke. Not loudly, not emotionally, just clearly. No. Every head turned toward my square. This is what happens when you treat one person like a financial resource instead of a human being for 31 years and assume they'll never say anything. My father stared at me. Everything we did was for this family. I nodded slightly. That's the problem. You thought this family only meant Madison. Madison flinched. Not dramatically, just enough. Then I added the part they weren't ready for. And you didn't just pressure me. You used my identity. You made financial claims in my name. You involved other families. That stops being parenting a long time before it gets to Thanksgiving dinner. Silence again. Different silence this time. Not denial. Recognition. Because even the relatives who loved pretending this was complicated were now forced to admit it wasn't. Richard Mercer spoke one last time. From our side, this matter is closed. Any further communication will go through counsel. And then he left the call. One by one, others followed. Not out of loyalty, out of discomfort. Until it was just us. My parents, Madison, me. My mother looked at me like she was trying to find the version of me that still absorbed consequences. She didn't. My father exhaled slowly. We can fix this privately. That almost made me laugh. Privately again. Always privately. I shook my head. No, you don't get private access to me anymore. Madison suddenly whispered, so what now? And I realized something strange.
They weren't asking how to fix the wedding. They were asking how to survive the fallout. I said the only thing left that was honest. Now you deal with it the way I did for years, without me. My mother's voice cracked slightly. Avery, we are your parents. I nodded. Yes. Pause. And you still chose this. That was the moment everything stopped. No yelling, no defense, just realization settling in like gravity. The call ended quietly after that. No dramatic goodbye, no reconciliation speech. Just silence returning to where control used to be. And for the first time in my entire life, I didn't feel like I owed anyone a recovery. Part 8. Small final thought. Freedom. A week later, I moved. Not dramatically, no boxes thrown into a truck in the rain, just a quiet lease transfer to a brighter apartment in Richmond. New city, new job promotion, new life that didn't require emotional debt payments. My father sold his classic car. My mother postponed a renovation she used to describe as our family legacy. Madison disappeared from social media for a while, then slowly returned with carefully curated posts about growth and healing journeys. Everyone survived, just not the version of themselves they were pretending to be. And me? I learned something simple. Peace doesn't look like revenge. It looks like not answering the phone anymore. It looks like not explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. It looks like realizing you were never difficult. You were just the only one keeping score honestly. People like my family don't fear anger. They don't fear arguments. They fear clarity, because clarity removes their favorite tool, confusion. And once you stop being confused, you stop being controllable. If I could leave you with one thing, it's this. The moment you stop carrying what was never yours to hold is the moment they finally have to face what they built without you holding it up. And most people don't like what they see.